Why does the Model 1891 rifle still shoot today? It survives due to a chronic supply failure. The government spent a century trying to replace this platform, dragging the weapon across 3 different centuries. Simoheha used it during the Winter War to eliminate 500 Soviet troops. Yet today, Russian snipers still receive this exact hardware on the front line. The weapon's operational history started with an earlier imperial conflict, 853 meters per second. This initial velocity defined the new imperial cartridge. The 7.62 by 54 millimeter rimmed ammunition offered lethal ballistics. The effective engagement range reached 450 meters. In February 1904, these exact specifications faced their first operational test. The Japanese military struck the naval base at Port Arthur. On paper, the Model 1891 delivered overwhelming firepower. In geopolitical reality, the state apparatus deployed illiterate peasants. Mobilized reservists received modern bolt-action platforms straight from factory shipping crates. Many conscripts touched their issued hardware for the very first time directly on the front line. Advanced ballistics meant nothing without basic infantry training. Unprepared units fumbled complex bolt mechanisms under direct enemy fire. Japanese infantry advanced aggressively across the Manchurian terrain. They carried the Type 30 Arisaka into close-quarters trench combat. Defending Russian lines struggled to maintain steady rates of suppressive fire. Maxim machine guns temporarily compensated for the infantry's tactical incompetence. Heavy, water-cooled weapons produced a mechanical roar while systematically shredding continuous assault waves. Yet, this isolated suppression fire could not salvage the collapsing defensive grid. The localized siege soon escalated into an industrial-scale conflict at Mukden. 600,000 soldiers converged along an 80-kilometer front. This unprecedented mass of armed combatants equaled the entire population of a major European city. The structural flaws of the imperial command hierarchy neutralized any hardware advantages. Peasant battalions shattered against synchronized artillery strikes and disciplined infantry maneuvers. The technical brilliance of the platform dissolved in the hands of untrained masses. 3 weeks of combat permanently broke the imperial army. By March 1905, the military operation concluded in a systemic failure. The state officially recorded 89,000 casualties. Frontline positions collapsed, erasing soldiers and hardware during the opening combat weeks. The shortages from previous campaigns escalated into a logistical catastrophe by August 1914. German forces destroyed Russian formations at Tannenberg, capturing or killing 130,000 men. Domestic factories failed to recover. Procurement officers crossed the Atlantic to outsource infantry supply. They ordered 1.5 million units from Remington and 1.8 million from New England Westinghouse, 3.3 million American-made rifles. This requisition surpassed the entire peacetime personnel of the Imperial Army. The Bridgeport assembly line smelled of wood and grease, outputting 4,000 units daily by late 1917. The Treasury never transferred the actual funds for these expenses. Crates holding hundreds of thousands of finished weapons sat stacked on factory floors. The October Revolution of 1917 severed the financial agreements permanently. The Bolshevik administration formally canceled all outstanding imperial invoices. The United States government purchased the abandoned inventory to save contractors from bankruptcy. Those unpaid American batches did not disappear. 200,000 citizens died from standard infantry weapons. From 1918 to 1922, Trotsky organized the Red Army around this platform. The combat rifle transitioned into an internal execution instrument. Heavy Model 1891 bolts clanked continuously across basements and prison courtyards. The Red Terror eliminated between 50,000 and 200,000 perceived enemies. The government redirected its primary border defense asset against the domestic population that originally engineered it. 2 decades after the internal executions, state leadership directed divisions northward, where infantry encountered their own platform modified by a foreign adversary. A 33-year-old farmer named Simo Heha positioned himself in the snow, utilizing a rifle devoid of optical enhancements. He operated a Sacco M2830, a Finnish variant chambered in 7.62 by 53 rimmed. The exposed steel receiver presented a contact burn hazard as ambient environmental temperatures plunged to -40 degrees Celsius. Heha systematically compressed the snowpack ahead of his barrel to suppress the physical powder disturbance during discharge. He subsequently packed frozen snow inside his mouth to lower exhalation temperature, eliminating the visible vapor trail that would otherwise betray his coordinates. The marksmen strictly rejected telescopic equipment, calculating that glass lenses would condense moisture while reflecting sunlight toward advancing counter-sniper units. Operating exclusively with iron sights over 95 days of deployment starting in November 1939, he registered 505 confirmed eliminations. The military apparatus attempted to resolve this friction by redirecting artillery batteries to obliterate a single firing position. An explosive projectile finally impacted his lower left jaw on March 6, 1940, terminating his frontline combat effectiveness near the conclusion of the 105-day conflict. The vulnerability of massed conscript infantry against an adapted platform translated into a severe strategic failure for the High Command. Sustaining 150,000 combat casualties equates to the systematic annihilation of several contemporary European standing armies. The operational reality demonstrated that overwhelming mechanized superiority could not compensate for structural deficiencies in basic infantry deployment. The winter campaign paralyzed the initial invasion timetable, forcing a negotiated boundary settlement instead of total territorial occupation. Total recorded fatalities for the advancing military forces ultimately reached 170,000 dead. The state attempted to retire an obsolete weapon, yet this effort triggered its highest production volume. The casualties of 1940 confirmed the bolt-action platform was outdated. A massive rearmament program began. In 1915, Vladimir Fedorov designed the Avtomat. Production stalled at 3,200 units. The rifle relied on Japanese 6.5mm Arisaka ammunition. When the government blocked foreign supply chains, the project died. By 1940, the military introduced the SVT-40 semi-automatic rifle. Targets demanded 2 million units annually. Operation Barbarossa launched in June 1941. The Red Army lost hundreds of thousands of semi-automatic rifles within months. Surviving weapons failed in combat. The SVT-40 required precise gas regulator adjustments. Conscripts lacked mechanical training. Mud filled the receivers. Jammed gas systems locked the action solid. Soldiers physically broke the mechanisms in the field. The 2 million unit plan collapsed against a shortage of qualified factory workers. Industry could not sustain complex manufacturing for untrained infantry. An ambitious strategy envisioned a modern, semi-automatic military, but reality forced a reversion to a 19th-century bolt-action design. In 1942, facilities received a direct order to stop the new lines and resume production of the 9130 platform. Halting the semi-automatic lines meant the defense of Stalingrad would rely entirely on the older bolt-action platform. The consequences of this industrial pivot stretched to the end of the conflict. Infantrymen pushed through the dust and concrete of Berlin's streets. They cleared the urban ruins using shortened M44 carbines. Every weapon receiver carried deep gouges. Rough cutter marks on the metal exposed the reality of rushed mass manufacturing. Soviet factories produced 19,800,000 of these crude rifles. The massive output covered a severe human toll. In late 1942, the battle for Stalingrad consumed whole divisions. The 24-hour life expectancy of an average soldier dictated the mathematics of combat. Urban warfare wiped out entire units in a single day. Survival required distance. The Vasily Zaitsev operated in these ruins. He attached a PU scope with 3.5 power magnification to his rifle. The 74mm focal length allowed accurate targeting. He registered 225 confirmed kills. Lyudmila Pavlichenko utilized the identical optical setup on her designated weapon. She recorded 309 kills before the command removed her from combat. The state sent her on foreign propaganda tours. Individual heroics mask the reality of mass infantry attrition. The government solved tactical problems by supplying the front with cheap firepower. A rifle consistently outlasted the man carrying it. By April and May 1945, the M44 variant answered the requirements of close-quarters combat. The shorter barrel and side-folding bayonet facilitated movement inside collapsed buildings. But the underlying strategy remained unchanged. The military demanded rapid volume rather than precision engineering. The production lines maintained their momentum long after the fighting stopped. The design spread to foreign arsenals. The final count reached 37 million units worldwide. Those 37 million rifles did not simply disappear after the fall of Berlin. They entered a vast network of state storage facilities. Decades later, weapons sealed in Kosmoline following the Reichstag assault were unpacked for high-altitude combat in the Hindu Kush Mountains. The Soviet Union possessed a massive arsenal of intercontinental ballistic missiles and nuclear warheads, leading observers to expect fully modernized infantry equipment. New domestic platforms existed in substantial numbers, including the SKS carbine, the AK-47 assault rifle, and the specialized SVD sniper system. The logistical reality proved different. In December 1979, Soviet forces crossed the border into Afghanistan. The command committed elite units, deploying the 56th Air Assault Brigade and the 345th Parachute Regiment. Supply chains failed. Instead of receiving modern SVD systems, paratroopers were issued obsolete 9130 platforms pulled directly from long-term warehouse storage. Troops carried rifles from the Second World War to fight insurgents who had not even been born when the hardware was built. Soviet troops were not the only forces bringing the 1891 platform to the Afghan gorges. Conscripts deployed in 1980 died from bullets fired by rifles manufactured for their own grandfathers at Stalingrad. The transfer was deliberate. 30 years earlier, in the 1950s, Moscow approved a $3.5 million arms credit. This pushed thousands of surplus rifles into Royal Afghan Army arsenals. Mujahideen fighters looted the stockpiles. Soviet infantry faced fire from weapons bearing 1944 Tula factory stamps. The state armaments program converted domestic production into a threat for its own personnel. By 1982, Command introduced modern SVD systems to frontline units. The older hardware never vanished. In February 1989, the 40th Army retreated southward. They abandoned a mountainous region saturated with vintage rifles. Tens of millions of barrels still lie suspended in thick preservation grease across vast storage facilities. The arsenals originally filled during the 1940s became the primary logistical reserve for the invasion of Ukraine. Around the year 2000, Russian engineers extracted surplus sniper variants from deep storage and converted them into a designated marksman platform called the OTS-48. They mounted the old receivers onto modern stocks, chambered them for the standard 7.62 by 54mm cartridge, and issued the hardware to Spetsnaz units. This specialized adaptation signaled a chronic failure in military procurement long before the major conflict began. When combat operations ignited in the Donbass region in 2014, the logistical reality deteriorated further. Photographs documented mobilized fighters carrying bolt-action models fitted with optics manufactured in Leningrad in 1941. 8 years later, in February 2022, the situation escalated into a systemic crisis. The thick Kosmoline preservation grease had barely been wiped off the wooden stocks when commanders handed these antiquated weapons to untrained conscripts. One group of 135 mobilized personnel surrendered almost immediately in the ruins of Mariupol. They stood holding century-old bolt-action rifles with 1941 optics, facing modern Ukrainian infantry units fully equipped with thermal sights and automated drone support. The presence of tens of millions of units in unverified storage conditions creates a permanent temptation for military leadership. Commanders can replenish staggering manpower losses without investing in modern infantry equipment. As current stockpiles of AK-74 assault rifles dwindle under heavy attrition, logisticians simply reach deeper into the Soviet-era archives. The weapon is distributed to mobilized personnel because command structures deploy these units strictly to absorb enemy artillery fire. If a platoon is deployed solely to expose hostile firing positions, the technical specifications of their firearms hold absolutely no tactical value. The operational difference between an automatic AK-74 and a manual bolt-action platform vanishes entirely. Survival is not the objective.